He is a 2013 political science graduate of Colorado Christian University. Native of the Midwest, now living in Colorado, and one of the reasons he's living in Colorado since completing college is that he jumped right into a fascinating job in that red-hot, nationally watched Douglas County school board race. Will it be reformers or will it be Union stooges on the school board? Please now meet Chad Yelinsky.
Who owns the future? This is the question presented to our panel today. This is not simply a question, however, but rather a task that was laid down by our Creator. In Genesis, we are called to steward the earth by working to take what was given to us and being responsible for it. For those who are to come after us, as conservatives, we believe in this remarkable ideology, not because we expect it to be easy for us, but rather that we will leave the task to carry on better for those who come after us. Our future is not what was given to us. It is from those who came before, but rather is what we are willing to make of it. Men like Michael Barone have realized this cause. He has spent a lifetime working for his calling to ensure that we have the skills and the tools necessary to create our own future, working on this task like others before him who have passed it down. Michael Barone has worked to ensure that we have the same opportunity as he did, as those who have come before him have done. He has given us his almanac of American politics. He has authored several books in order to teach us more about what the cost has been, where we have come from, to help us better understand how to go forward. Who owns the future? Simply answered, I do. You do. The young gun conservative leaders who will be speaking with us on the panel today, Mary Katharine Ham and Guy Benson, do. Or rather, Mary Katharine Ham, who will be joining us remotely. But they believe in the same ideology, the same great cause that was laid down by those who have come before us. That with every great cause comes the responsibility of sacrificing for it. Each member of this panel is a prominent conservative leader recognized for the values that they live their lives for and by the work that they have dedicated their lives towards. They are known nationally for the news outlets that they write for the message they speak, which is heard weekly. It is battling for us to claim our future of what we are trying to build for tomorrow. Ownership of the future we are tasked with creating. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel. This will be brilliant.
Well, your MC was supposed to play a video to allow them to get the chairs set for the panel, and if we can watch the Who Owns the Future video right now. By the way, Caleb Bonham, video blogger extraordinaire who went viral 3 or 4 times with the promotional run-up in recent weeks for Western Conservative Summit, is responsible for a lot of the creative videos that we're seeing this weekend, including the fabulous beauty pageant piece that played before we opened. If you want to make a special donation to Centennial Institute, at least here in Denver, I can put you in touch with Caleb. He will put that tiara on you and film you. No video? Okay, we're not going to do the video. And it was mentioned that Mary Katharine Ham joins us remotely. Mary Katharine is to become a mother in August, and I think it's probably the second most anticipated birth of the summer. And so we did the Skype test last night, and it came off flawlessly, and unless the technology gremlin zaps us this morning, we'll be joined by Skype for Mary Katharine Ham. So now the question, Guy, Michael, and back on the East Coast, Mary Katharine, who owns the future? Chad set it up very effectively, and appropriately, we've got a couple of the panelists in the just this side or just that side age group around age 30 that we are so focused upon in the conservative movement this year and here at the summit. So let's start with Guy Benson. Who does own the future? Guy?
Thank you, John. First, let me say what a pleasure it is to be back in Denver and here at this summit. Over the last couple of years, I've gone to a lot of events sort of in this mold. You guys do it right. You guys bring your A game. This is fantastic. And there's something about Rocky Mountain conservatives that is really fun to be around. And it was also neat to be out with some of the young people last night, maybe a little bit later than I should have been, but you only live once, I guess. And I really look forward to seeing my good friend Mary Katharine Hammond joining us momentarily. She is 8 months pregnant. This is with her first. It's really exciting. Her doctor decided that it probably was not wise for her to fly at this point. And I think it's so strange that he was kicking up such a fuss over a clump of cells that way, but he did for some reason. I do think that the weekly calls from Planned Parenthood telling her there's still time, that's a little creepy.
Ew.
So anyway, there she is. I think she's Mary Katharine. I'm seeing her down here. She up there? There she is.
Good morning, Mary Katharine.
Good morning.
So in terms of this question, it's a very broad question. Who owns the future? And Mary Katharine, if you ever heard the two of us on Hugh Hewitt's show, we like to sort of keep it loose and fun. And then when we heard Michael Barone had been added to the panel, we had an emergency dinner in D.C. We're like, we got to clean up our act. We got to get things together. We have to behave. So we had a little bit of a strategy session. So I decided I was going to tackle this question.
Hey, Guy, are you telling me that you're intimidated by your grandfather sitting here between us?
Oh, he's far too young to be my grandfather. Come on. Right?
Yeah.
I was going to tackle the question narrowly through the prism of the upcoming elections in 2013 and 2014. Just give a brief outline of what I see coming and then move on to my distinguished co-panelists. Starting in 2013, this year, there are two gubernatorial races in the United States. There's New Jersey, where Chris Christie is clinging to a 30-point lead over his hapless Democratic opponent. And
I think he clearly outweighs her. Yeah.
Outweighs most. Let's be clear. But he's going to win. I'm a New Jerseyan, actually, and I'll say this about Chris Christie: there's a lot of conservatives who aren't particularly enamored of him. Come to New Jersey, and when you spend some time in New Jersey, I think you might understand that regardless of what you think of him on a more national stage, he is exactly what the state of New Jersey has needed. He's been the best thing to happen to my state in my lifetime. And, the state has been run by bullies for decades, and they've gotten us into a lot of trouble. And Chris Christie, he's a little pugnacious, he's a little truculent, he's a bit of a bully from time to time, but that's what we needed. So he's going to win. In Virginia, which is my new adoptive home state, there's also a gubernatorial contest. And speaking only on my own behalf and not urging any of you to go out and support any candidates in compliance with the tax law, I will say that Ken Cuccinelli is a very strong conservative, and he is in a tough fight with Terry McAuliffe down there. It is nip and tuck. I think it's going to be a toss-up race. It's going to be very, very ugly, and there's a lot of undecided voters. So if you're on the sidelines thinking about what can I do this year, who might I help, however you may see fit, Ken Cuccinelli is probably in more need of help than Chris Christie, who's sitting pretty. I would be remiss, by the way, if I moved on from 2013 without pointing out that last I heard there are a couple elections on September the 10th here in Colorado. And those will be fascinating to watch. And so I was getting some of the inside dynamics about those last night at dinner from some state senators, but you guys probably know more about that than I do. Let's look at 2014.
Guy, just for context for our friends in Scottsdale, Colorado's Constitution since 1876 has provided that we the people may petition to fire a state legislator in the middle of his or her House or Senate term for cause as the people may see fit. It doesn't just have to be malfeasance of some kind. In this case, Senator John Morse, Democrat of Colorado Springs, he happens to be the Senate president, and Senator Angela Giron of Pueblo, blue-collar Democrat town, steel town. Mike Barone would identify with that as a Detroiter. Giron and Morse are on the ballot to be recalled because of deep objections by their constituents to particularly the gun-grabbing votes that they cast, some would say at the behest of New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, in this last legislative session. It's never been in the history of Colorado that state legislators have been fired by we the people on a recall in midterm. That's what he means about September 10th.
Indeed. And I think it's interesting, just on the topic of New York City, that you've got a mayor now who's like a Slurpee grabber, and he might be replaced by America's most famous amateur photographer. Although that was complicated a bit this week with everything that we saw. That was quite a spectacle. So let's talk about 2014, because I think a lot of conservatives make a mistake of casting their eyes too far ahead to 2016. What's the presidential race and field going to shape up looking like? We saw a gentleman last night in Scott Walker who very well might run. You're going to hear from Ted Cruz a little bit later on. He might run. It's going to be, I think, regardless of who gets in, it's going to be an impressive field, but that's also a long time from now. That's 3 years from now. I understand presidential politics are all-consuming, and people are so tired of the president that we have in office. His approval ratings this week are dreadful. He hit 25% approval among independents this week in the new Fox News poll. So people are going to look ahead. But there's a more immediate task, which is the 2014 elections. Now, I've spoken to a number of House Republicans. I've talked to some folks at the NRCC in Washington. They're very confident that Republicans are going to hold the House again in 2014. In fact, they're going to go on offense. They think they can make up some of the little bit of ground that they lost in 2012 when Barack Obama won and had some coattails. So I think the House is safe. And by the way, a quick aside, because I hear this all the time when I bring up the fact that Republicans control the House. I hear from the left, well, that's only because of gerrymandering and redistricting, and Democrats won the popular vote in the House in 2012. They're right that Democrats won the popular vote in the House in 2012. They ran up the score, especially in some cities. But there's a few points that you can make right back to them. First of all, let's say redistricting hadn't happened. If the exact same districts had held in 2010 to 2012 and 2008 to 2012, it would have been the same result. Republicans would have won a couple fewer seats, but it would still be a Republican-held House of Representatives. Also, Larry Sabato has pointed out that Republicans won the popular House vote in 28 out of our 50 states in 2012. And finally, what's a phrase we hear all the time from the left? Elections have consequences. Well, guess what happened in 2010? The Democrats passed Obamacare. The American people didn't want it. A massive red wave swept the country, including in many state legislatures, which then determined redistricting. Elections have consequences, Democrats, and now you're dealing with them, so live with it. Now, in the Senate's very interesting. I think a lot of us would say it would be a very tall task for Republicans to win back the Senate in 2014. That's been shifting a little bit in the GOP's favor, in my view, especially with an announcement in Montana recently where the popular former governor Brian Schweitzer announced he was not going to run for Senate. So there are 3 open seats that are eminently gettable for the GOP in South Dakota, West Virginia, and Montana, all states won and carried heavily by Mitt Romney. Then there are some Democratic incumbents who are very vulnerable. Mark Pryor down in Arkansas, he's probably going to be opposed by a guy named Tom Cotton from the House, who's a young military veteran, very strong, energetic. I think he'll win. Kay Hagan in North Carolina is in a little bit of trouble. Mary Landrieu down in Louisiana. Mark Begich up in Alaska as well. A few other open seats, Iowa, Michigan, maybe on the outskirts of attainable for Republicans.
So, Guy, coming up on a hard break, as we say in radio, what are the odds Republicans do take the Senate and send Harry Reid to the back bench?
Oh, how wonderful that would be. I think it's going to be still a tough road.
You make
to
it
hoe.
50-50?
Maybe 50-50, and because unfortunately I'll leave on maybe a slightly lower note. Republicans seem to have, especially in Senate races, a special talent for blowing it. And so they need to net 6. I think it's doable, more so than it was even a month ago, but there's a long way to go. But it's going to take a lot of hard work. And by the way, there's an incumbent in this state, too, who people aren't talking about as being vulnerable. If you get the right candidate, that could change as well. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Part of my job during the weekend, Guy Benson, thanks a lot. Part of my job during the weekend is to issue the obligatory disclaimers. I've got attorneys hovering behind the curtain here, coaching me. I just need to go on record that Colorado Christian University, and for that matter, our friends at Arizona Christian University gathered in Scottsdale today, we never do odds making, okay? So Mary Katharine, it was wonderful to have you at the first summit in 2010. You really lit up the room, and it's fun to have you back by virtual participation this morning. And I know that even though your little one isn't here yet, it already gives you a more serious sense of this question, who owns the future? The question K.T. McFarland explored with us just now, is America's best day ahead or behind us? Who do you say owns the future? And welcome, please, everybody welcome Mary Katharine Ham.
Thank you, everyone. I apologize. Can you hear me all right? Are we good?
It's great.
All right. I apologize for not being able to be there in person. I am 36 weeks pregnant. It's a good thing maybe I'm not there in person because there's not that much that fits me anymore. And every time Guy refers to the house, I respond. That's how big I am. So it's nice to be here remotely, though, and I appreciate you guys having me. What I want to talk about is just lay out a couple of the facts about young voters, particularly millennials, who I'm sure you guys have heard about. There may be some of you guys in the audience. There may be some of you who have millennials of your own. I am the oldest of the millennials. I'm the grandma of the millennials. I technically am in the group, but it's very close. You have to be generous with the timeline. But I'm gonna pretend I'm a peer member. Guy is definitely in the group. And just talk about some of our challenges as conservatives reaching that group and some of the things that are good that we can emphasize. And I think that's really the key moving forward, is to think about accentuating the positive. It's not about abandoning what it means to be conservative in order to reach young people, but it is about thinking about how we communicate things and thinking about which issues work for them and which do not. And the ones that do not, we need to not make a barrier to joining us on other issues. So that's sort of the basic take. Let me first start with the social issues question, because a lot of people will far too easily say, and it's a lot of people on the left who this suits their ends, is that we should just toss out social issues, and that would be the remedy. As Guy and I like to discuss, and have discussed many times, not all social issues are created equal. I think Guy and I agree, and the polling shows that when it comes to gay marriage, it's a very tough sell to be against it for young people these days. The numbers have just they're just not good on that issue for social conservatives who are against it. On the other hand, this is where I come to the accentuating the positive. On the other hand, when it comes to abortion, it is not in the same category as gay marriage. And this is something that it's important for us to keep in mind, because we get so often beat down by the media coverage that's trying to convince us that we are extreme, that we are not part of the mainstream. We're not even close to the mainstream. That is not the case. Let me just, a few numbers real quick. A July poll with National Journal about the post 20-week abortion ban, with exceptions for rape and incest, that the House was dealing with and that several states are dealing with. Among young people, 18 to 29-year-olds, far more likely to favor the ban than those who are over 50. The number, 52% in favor of the ban, 39% against. That is a pretty decent margin for us. So keep that in mind. There's also a 2011 Public Religion Institute study that showed, and I just love this because it's the intersection of how technology can change people's minds in our favor. And they did a study that actually included some discussion of why young people perhaps were less friendly to abortion, even though perhaps they're less religious. They just make a moral distinction here. Part of the reason is that the study showed that those who've recently seen an ultrasound were far less likely to support abortion. And so many young people, having grown up with a portrait of their ultrasound sibling on their refrigerator, tend to think that those are actual people. Surprise, surprise. So that's one of those areas where I think it's interesting that and this is one of the diagnoses about the GOP in 2012, is that on technology, they were not on the same page with young people. They were not using all the tools that were available to them. And I think that's one of the reasons that's important, is because communicating with young people on those levels and understanding what their exposure to technology looks like and how it changes their views is important to us. And I think it can be important to changing their minds about things. I often point out when talking to other young people that, for instance, with their iPhone or their, what have you, usually an iPhone, they can change the background, they can change their playlist. Everything is customized to them within 3 clicks of any button, virtual buttons, and they would be seriously unhappy if those changes could not be made immediately, right in front of their faces, even though the information has to go to a satellite and back. They demand it immediately. And I ask them, why is it then, when it comes to something as intimate as your healthcare, do you insist on a one-size-fits-all solution granted unto you by a giant federal government that you have no control over? So I think there's an intersection there that we can exploit, and there is a gap between, for instance, the Barack Obama campaign, which it did inspire a lot of young people who got involved via technology, who felt that it was very responsive and cared about what they believed in and cared about their problems, and the actual machinery of a giant government that is clumsy, is not good at delivering on promises. And pointing out that gap and saying we'd like to, make sure that a simpler and more refined government could actually, do the things that it promises you it's going to do, Obamacare, exploiting the gap between those expectations and what actually happens on the ground is important with young people, because they may be more friendly to the idea of government than many of us are ideologically, but they also want something that works. And that's pretty universal. And I think arguing to them that, hey, all this complexity and all this giant machinery doesn't actually work that well is a good pitch for us. And that's shown in studies and focus grouping, that they get that complexity can kind of mess with the little guy, that complexity can prevent things from working properly. But we're not so great always at communicating that. A couple thoughts. Romney actually did lose young people by a little bit less than McCain did. Barack Obama had lost some momentum.
Now that's my idea of a conservative trend. We're losing more slowly. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, any amount of progress, right? But it's largely because people were sort of disillusioned with Obama. Maybe he didn't get exactly he didn't hit exactly the heights of 2008, but the proportion of young people in the electorate went up. So part of my pitch to you guys is not to abandon this demographic. I mean, that's really giving up. And here's the issue. Because the economy is bad, many young people, first of all, they're naturally inclined to put off the things that would naturally make you more conservative, like getting married, having kids, starting businesses. They're unable to do those things because of the illustrious economy that Barack Obama inherited and has not done anything about for the last 5 years. So they're putting those things off. They're more inclined to do that naturally, but they're putting them off more because of the economy. So waiting around for them to magically become conservative when those things change, I don't think is an option the way that it used to be.
Mary Katharine, hold that thought. I need to speak on behalf of the gray hair throughout the audience, sprinkled at least throughout the audience in both Denver and Scottsdale this morning.
Yeah.
And I just need to remind the two of you that there is that proverb that age and guile beat youth and idealism every time. And so we love your spirit. It fills us with encouragement that the woeful groupthink and leftist domination, secular domination of public discourse by the media and the pundit class in America can be broken by talent like Mary Katharine Ham and Guy Benson. But on behalf of the baby boomers, Michael Barone and John Andrews, just remember that there have been times when the shiny young gun was bested by the rusty old saber, which sets us up to hear from Michael Barone.
Well, thank you very much, John. I've never been introduced as a rusty old saber before. Reflecting on some of the excesses of the baby boom, I have said over the years that the good news is that the baby boom generation is going to die out pretty soon. The bad news is that I'm going to die about the same time. So that's perspective from which I see it.
Well, at Centennial Institute, we believe America can beat the actuarial tables, that her greatest days are ahead, as McFarland told us this morning. Why don't you and I beat the actuarial tables and have the last laugh and live to be 100, Michael?
Well, that's okay with me. It's kosher by me. But we've had this. We're addressing the question, who owns the future? And I think, in my point of view, nobody owns the future. You get a chance to rent some of it. And if you take advantage of that chance, you can sometimes make enduring public policies which make this country a better place. And one of the people that's done that, by the way, is your co-chairman, former U.S. Senator Bill Armstrong.
He has indeed. Bill Armstrong.
And Bill Armstrong was in his third year in the Senate. The Reagan tax reform was under consideration. He was the guy who insisted on indexing income tax, which meant that inflation did not drive you into a higher income tax bracket even when your real income remained the same. That is a huge public policy that is in place 32 years later that has limited government and limited government spending, limited government revenues in a significant way. And it shows what a citizen politician, a man who retired after 2 terms and returned to private life, can accomplish on occasion and can make an enduring difference. So nobody's going to own the future. Conservatives would like to rent some more of it than they have right now, and I think the prospects for that are fairly good. I mean, we've been told constantly since the 2012 election that the demographic trends mean that the Democrats inevitably are going to become the natural majority party in the country. We also heard after the 2004 election that demographic trends meant that the Republicans were going to become the natural majority party in the country, and that didn't turn out to be true in 2006 and 2008, and it did not turn out to be true for the Democrats in 2010. I think, let's look at some of those groups. We're told that because of Democrats' big margins, Obama's big margins among non-whites and among young voters, Democrats were bound to win. Well, Obama did carry black voters 93 to 6%. With a high turnout among African Americans. That's probably a high watermark for the Democratic Party in percentage terms and as a percentage of the whole electorate. And if you look, for example, at the Democratic Foreign Public Policy polls recently that asked voters how they would vote if Hillary Clinton throws her broom into the ring, one of the things they showed there was that the 5 Republicans that they tested were getting about 18% of black, 13 to 17% of the vote from black Americans. That tells us that the Obama numbers are more particular to him than general for the future. Hispanics, Obama carried them by a 71-27 margin, by an even larger margin here in Colorado, 75 to 23. Mitt Romney carried white voters in Colorado by 10 points and still lost the state. That is a problem for Republicans. The millennial generation, as Mary Katharine pointed out, went down from 66-32 Obama in 2008 to 60-37 in 2012. That was the biggest movement of any age group. I mean, Republicans have missed their chance earlier to cinch future elections by passing a constitutional amendment denying the right to vote to anybody born after 1980. But that's, having missed that chance, it seems they're too large a percentage of the electorate to do that. You take those two groups, There's some overlap between them. Hispanics were 10%. They're going to increase as a share of the electorate. Millennials were 19%. Together, they made up 25% of the electorate because there's some overlap. But there's some countervailing numbers here that we should not lose sight of. When you go down that exit poll, you see white evangelical Protestants. They were 26% of the electorate, a steady percentage. They're not going away. And they voted 79 to 21% for Mitt Romney. We heard a lot during the campaign that evangelical Protestants don't like the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, and they're suspicious of it. You don't see much evidence for that when you carry a group 79 to 21, which is better than George W. Bush, actually, in 2004. White Catholics, they're 18% of the electorate. That's probably a percentage that's going to decline a little in the future. They voted 59 to 40 for Mitt Romney. That's probably the best vote percentage terms for a Republican presidential nominee among white Catholics in history. Barack Obama, with the contraception mandate there, where people are being forced to pay for insurance to cover contraceptive procedures because these are so onerous for women, they amount to something that's a little less than 2 pumpkin lattes at Starbucks a month. That triggered some backlash in the Catholic Church, and it's evident in those numbers. You don't always get, you may gain votes with one group, you can lose them with another. So I think the picture I see, both parties face a problem with significant segments of the electorate. And by the way, white Catholics and white evangelical Protestants, which are non-overlapping constituencies, are 44% of the electorate. So if I was a strategist for the Democratic Party, I would say, you folks may have some problems there because you've got problems with demographic groups and that you're not going to be able to win. Now, some of the liberal analysts have said, well, Republicans now need to get over 60% of the vote of, quote, whites, unquote, using the categories we use today to analyze so-called racial groups. And that never happened in history, so it can't happen in the future. I think that's not necessarily true. Sean Trendy, the political analyst in Real Clear Politics, addressed this pretty intelligently recently and at length. I would just say from my study of history, one of the things it tells me is that groups that are minorities tend to vote more cohesively and one-sidedly in partisan terms than groups which are self-defined as a majority. That's partly because both political parties have to compete for majority groups, and they don't necessarily get votes from. They can ignore some smaller demographic groups and still win. And basic whites have been told for quite a while now, hey, you're going to be a minority in America today. Well, they're starting to vote like a minority. They voted 39% for Mitt Romney. Republicans carried them the House popular vote 60-37 in 2010. So I don't think that there's anything inevitable about the so-called, non-whites and youngs taking over the electorate and making Republican victories impossible. There are challenges for Republicans there. There are also challenges for the Democrats. Mary Katharine addressed the millennials in, I think, a very fascinating and perceptive way. And their tendency, the anomaly of these people who are the 21st century, latest technology people embracing policies that would have been appealed to Clement Attlee and the British Labour Party in 1950. But that's I think there is an anomaly there. I would also say that past voting behavior doesn't necessarily project in the future. That's sort of like the requirement the investment companies have to require you. Past performance is no guarantee. The baby boom generation, God bless us, voted about 13% more for George McGovern than the rest of the country in 1972. They voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. Their past voting behavior was not replicated in the future. And I'd like to expand a little bit on what Mary Katharine talked about, what I call the cultural issues. I think she laid out the data in a very perceptive way on abortion. People in the millennial generation owe their existence to a decision by somebody not to have an abortion. And they know they're the sonogram generation, and they're not embracing this as a part of liberation. They realize that actually science tells us that the baby has a different DNA from the mother. She's not just part of the mother's body, she or he. So I think that they are actually a little more conservative on this. You get three other cultural issues. I see the public and the younger generation moving in a libertarian way. One of them is same-sex marriage. I think that people on all sides of this issue, it behooves them to speak respectfully and listen respectively to people on the other side, however strongly they take their point of view. In marijuana legalization, we've had this in Colorado, and I gather there are even considerable numbers of dispensaries in Colorado Springs, I've been told.
There's communities where Colorado now has more medical marijuana dispensaries than it does Starbucks. Caffeine is not the ideal drug, but I'd rather have a latte. Thanks anyway.
Well, the third issue on which the public has become more libertarian, gun rights, the Second Amendment, and we're hearing a lot
Witness
about that.
that recall that's happening in Colorado. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Now the segment of our society that we call mainstream media hasn't figured this out, but Americans are actually more libertarian about gun rights now than they were 50 years ago, and the younger generation shares that as well. So,
Michael, excuse me, do you think that when Chris Christie observed the other day that libertarians are dangerous, it was a coded message to Rand Paul?
Yeah, well, I think he was talking specifically about foreign policy and so forth, and that we should not have what Christie might characterize as an isolationist foreign policy.
Let me pause you, Michael. We need to rush Guy Benson to the airport under police escort and put him on a plane because friends in Scottsdale, Guy is joining you live this afternoon. And preliminary to that, we'll take one question from the floor from a microphone in Denver and one texted question to me at 720-489-7700. That's from Arizona. Text me your question. And as we're receiving those, I want a lightning round of the panelists. Which is most dangerous as far as creating a permanent conservative political disadvantage, a permanent left liberal majority in America? Which is most dangerous? Mary Katharine, Guy, Michael. Would you say it is the fast track to citizenship for illegal aliens joining Democrat voter rolls? Or is it the entrenchment of Obamacare as an entitlement that creates dependency on health care as it has in Britain, where even Thatcher wouldn't touch it? Or third option, which is most dangerous? Is it the secularization of America and the marginalizing, ghettoizing of people of faith? How do you answer, Mary Katharine?
This may just be because it's my hobby horse, but the Obamacare stuff perhaps scares me more than anything else, because I know that when you have an entitlement given to you, even if it's bad, even if it performs badly, as Medicare and Medicaid can often do, Social Security, many young people don't think they'll ever see a dime of it, but we still, they still vote.
Yeah, and that's been the story in Britain.
Right.
They don't love the NHS, but it's sacrosanct.
But getting rid of it is impossible. So that's what concerns me a great deal, because I do not think it will work. I think it will be disastrous for most people. And then if we're stuck with it, that's a real tragedy.
Micah Barone, which is the worst of the three?
Well, I think Obamacare is the biggest threat. I observe that, Spain is not the only place in the world where we are seeing a train wreck. As Max Bauck is one of the architects of Obamacare, characterized, and this thing is coming undone. And we've also had the president disobeying his constitutional duty to take care to faithfully execute the law by saying, well, we're just not going to enforce the employer mandate, and we're not going to verify that people who apply for subsidies are eligible for them. We're going to follow the policy. New York Mayor John Lindsay's welfare commissioner, who announced he wasn't going to verify welfare recipients' applications, it got known as Come and Get It Ginsburg. We're going to get Come and Get It Sebelius.
What do you say, you, Guy?
Well, I would concur on the Obamacare points. I would add option D. I think the greatest threat to conservatism, more than ever, is the media. The media is drifting farther and farther away from any pretense of objectivity, and they have a way of constructing completely false narratives that they all believe in their bubble that don't reflect what reality is. Mary Katharine ran through some of the numbers on life issues, both with not just young people, but women. Women are leading the charge for more restrictions on abortion, and the media keeps parroting women's issues. Wendy Davis, cute shoes. I mean, it's really pernicious and insidious. Another one, and I'll leave with this, is voter ID laws. They just passed one in North Carolina. The media treats voter ID laws like it is white Republicans trying to suppress black voters. That is the narrative. And by the way, the numbers don't bear that out at all. And there's some numbers in Georgia, for example, which is a great test case that show the media is completely full of it on this point. But there was a poll that came out just yesterday, national poll from McClatchy and Marist. 83% of the American people support voter ID laws. 83, but we're still cast as extremists. The most extraordinary number from that poll, 65% of Democrats support voter ID, 70-some-odd% of independents, and in that poll, 99% of Republicans support voter ID laws. So for once, we can say we are the 99%.
Yeah.
All right. A questioner in Denver, please be ready at the mic, but I hear by text from Scottsdale, and this is your fellow millennial guy and Mary Katharine, Sally Gooding of Tempe, Arizona, college town, of course, says, speaking of the we, so many of our fellow millennials are propagandized to believe that progressivism is the way of the future. How do we convince our fellow millennials that progressive really means regressive, back to the past, as Michael Barone said, Clement Attlee-minded policies of the Labour Party Britain 60 years ago? Mary Katharine?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think with many young people, one of the big obstacles, and this speaks to what Guy pointed out rightly as some of the media coverage that makes them think that being anything other progressive is just wrong. That being progressive is just a social marker for I'm a good person. And so I think getting beyond that, speaking to specific issues with them, for instance, Republican candidates or Republican governors like Rick Perry and Mitch Daniels have been pretty smart about coming up with innovative ways to make college cheaper instead of just subsidizing it from a national level. That's something that millennials care a bunch about because they are unable to start their lives when they are in incredible debt from college. So that's something that they'll listen to that is not an ideologically charged issue where you can say this is an actual solution to the problem. So I think picking out those issues and relating to them on those fronts, and then to Michael's point about the marijuana, and that's not because I have a personal stake or affection for this issue in particular,
Sure.
but I have always said that if you really wanted to whip their heads around, the whole GOP would just say, let the states take care of weed. Be done with it, DEA. And then they'd all go, what? So that might be a shortcut.
Who have we got with a question in Denver? And it'll be our last one, and we'll handle it quickly.
Dan Bergman. My question is for all the panelists. You mentioned, Kate, the 83% of Americans across the border are in favor of voter ID laws. So I want to know what is holding the GOP back at the state levels and at the national level from backing off state issues on just simply passing voter ID laws in every 50 states of the union. And, as was mentioned about tuition, we can just use that and then say, see, it worked. Now we'll move on to other things. What is holding people back? I mean, with 83%.
Thanks a lot. Guy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, and then I really have to run, or else Arizona's going to be disappointed or maybe thrilled when I don't make it. But I would say some state legislatures have actually done this, and some governors have taken great leadership, and Scott Walker is one of them. And some of that comes down to courage, having the courage of your convictions and not falling victim to this media vortex that you're the crazy extremist when in fact you're not. They're very good at creating false realities that sometimes our side buys into. And I'll leave with this very last point. I think that our side needs to be better at being happier and funnier and more and not taking everything so seriously and being angry all the time. It doesn't wear well. Young people view us as sort of an older, angry party, and there's plenty to be angry about. I'm not disputing that at all, but I think part of it is just sort of the way we come across to voters, to young people. We sometimes make it easier to pigeonhole us, and I think that's something we ought to work on. And I try to work on it. Mary Katharine is one of the best at it. Somehow keeping a smile on her face every week with O'Reilly and Williams yelling at her. It's impressive stuff. I got to run, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be back in Denver.
So, Guy, here is your Ben Hummel caricature portrait, and here in the bag is here's a mystery gift for you to present at dinner tonight with the Mike Huckabee session when you are down in Scottsdale. Something we think our Arizona friends will just find very, very heartwarming when you deliver it on behalf of their friends in Colorado. And now racing to the airport under police escort, Guy Benson.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Let me put this down.
Travel safe, friend.
I really appreciate it.
And last word to Micah Barone on this session. Michael, if you had to pick and we didn't rehearse this, but I bet you've got a good answer. If you had to pick a poster guy or gal right now among the Republican conservative ranks in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate for building a coalition of all ages and all colors, which is our theme at the summit this weekend, building that broad coalition, millennials to baby boomers, every color, who is really good at this in the House or Senate?
Oh, I think a lot of people are good at this. You're trying to put me on the spot.
We run the risk of excluding some, but just name a couple.
I'll give a note to somebody who's made some good policy noise in the last week, Congressman Tom Cotton of the 4th District of Arkansas.
Potential U.S. Senator, as Guy mentioned.
He's got, there's a Senate race coming up there against a Democrat who's clearly vulnerable in a state where all the other members of the congressional.
And what about a
delegation
senator?
Against. Oh, I'm not going to name one of the senators over another. My gosh, who is the person that can do that? It's hard to say now that Strom Thurmond is gone. Okay. Speaking of another generation. Can I just share one little bit of census data with you, John? Because I grew up in Michigan. I was a liberal there 40 years ago. We've seen what's happened to policies there. We thought that states like Texas would have to adopt Michigan's policies to be modern and up to date. Well, here's some census data comparing 1970 and 2010, 40 years of difference. In 1970, Michigan had 9 million people. In 2010, it had 10 million people. In 1970, Texas had 11 million people. In 2010, Texas had 25 million people. Whose policies worked?
All right. MK Hammer, you don't know our tradition that we've established at the summit yesterday and today. If you want to show baby what mommy looked like when she was young and wild before she was a mommy, right, through the eyes of an adoring groupie artist by the name of Ben Hummel, this is a present that'll be coming to you by express. And best wishes to you. Thanks for being with us this morning. Best wishes with the arrival of the expected child.
Thank you. Can I add one quick
sentence? Yes, please.
Yes, just real quick. I wanted to say, when it comes to reaching new demographics, and when you talk to young people, they give Obama credit for trying. They give him a lot of credit for trying, even when he fails. So I just want to say, the first step is to get out there, outside your comfort zone. I think Cruz, Rubio, Paul, all have been very good. Walker, to some extent as well, at making sure you try to reach these new demographics. Just go out and make the pitch, and that is the first step. So it sounds facile, but it's true. And they won't give us as much credit as Obama, but they'll give us a little.
Bravo, and we thank you. Scottsdale thanks you. Denver thanks you with all our heart, Mary Katharine. And finally, we didn't neglect Micah Barone with a portrait. Denver's own Philip Anschutz, a visionary entrepreneur, not only in energy and communication, but in media. Walden Media, produced the Narnia films, great stuff coming out of Hollywood, but also in the political policy sphere, the Washington Examiner. You have samples of the print Examiner around this morning, also on the website. And artist Ben Hummel, Michael, has portrayed you as if you were a page feature in the print Examiner or cover page of WashingtonExaminer.com. We thank Michael Barone, Mary Katharine Ham, and Guy Benson. Thanks a lot. Well done. All right. pro-life was a theme of this panel just now around who owns the future. Some of you were here a couple of years ago when the inimitable Mark Stein talked about his demographic projections that first Europe and now America may not even believe in the future enough to have replacement levels of new births, like the happy anticipated arrival of Mary Katharine. There's no greater pro-life hero that has served in the U.S. Congress in our lifetime. I guess the great Henry Hyde would be up there, but when I got to the Colorado Senate 15 years ago, someone who helped show me around and became a very close friend and an ally on every economic and social and moral conservative issue went on to become a terrific U.S. Congresswoman, and she now heads the Susan B. Anthony List pro-life organization. We want a short report from former Congresswoman Marilyn Musgrave about the progress of pro-life, pro-family.
Well, thank you so much. How wonderful to be with you. And if you really believe I could tell John Andrews anything about economics or anything else, you're at the wrong place. He came into the Senate and went on to be president of the Senate, and I was honored to serve with him. You know, when you get Bill Armstrong and John Andrews together, you have a force to be reckoned with. I will say to Bill Andrews, or to him, to Bill Armstrong, when the Lord said president down the road, you know, I still think, Bill, he really meant, you know, like the president. But I love it that you're at CCU. You know, Susan B. Anthony List is the political arm of the pro-life movement, and whenever we stand for something, we need a force to be reckoned with in that public policy arena. You know, 40 years ago after Roe v. Wade, the headline said, basically, abortion issue settled by the Supreme Court. It is anything but settled all these 40 years later. We are a country that's becoming more and more pro-life. I love what the panelists said for me. More young people, women leading the fight. And you know, Mary Katharine Ham, I wonder when she was 5 months pregnant if she knew she was pregnant with a baby. Of course she did. I love the comments about the sonogram. And I want to say in the pro-life movement, once in a lifetime happened with Kermit Gosnell in Philadelphia. Think of it, an abortionist in a facility in Philadelphia, and they weren't busted for what they did to women and taking the lives of innocent children, but illegal prescription drugs. But once that curtain was removed and people were able to see what was going on in that facility, everything changed in the pro-life movement. Think of it, that man convicted for the death of 3 babies, the negligent death of a woman who had an overdose of anesthesia, and all of the other hellish things that were going on in that filthy, despicable place. Well, the American public had a chance to take a look at abortion. You know, people that probably don't even think of it very much got a look at late-term abortion and infanticide and pathetic health care for women. And that's why the states have responded. In historic numbers, we've had pro-life laws passed in the state, and I'm so happy at Susan B. Anthony List. We have formed a national pro-life women's caucus. You know, the woman has a unique perspective on the abortion issue, and we're championing women around this country speaking up on this issue, passing pro-life legislation. You know, I'm wearing my blue today because I was in Austin. Little did Lady Bird Johnson know when she did that anti-litter campaign, don't mess with Texas, what it would lead to today. You know, I was on the steps of that state capitol speaking with Huckabee and others, and the pro-life crowd was like a sea of blue. Down the hill, you couldn't see the end of it on the east or the west. Pro-life people speaking up for reasonable regulations on abortion facilities, banning late-term abortion, and that is happening around the states. We at Susan B. Anthony List know that in the 13 House seats that are up for grabs, in the 10 Senate seats, that it's going to be very good to bring the life issue into the debate. You know, outside of Mary Landrieu's office, I can just see it. This woman won't even support a ban on abortion after 20 weeks. She won't support reasonable regulations for health care of women. You know, Mary Landrieu's in a pro-life state. Pryor's in a pro-life state. Look at Alaska. Look at other states where the life issue can make all the difference. You know, when I stand before you today, I think about the Declaration of Independence, and I know that you all do, and you love it. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. The right to life. What are the others? You know what? If you don't have the right to life, the others don't matter. Be strong. Help elect pro-life candidates. Thank you very much.
Marilyn Musgrave, golly, there's Tea Partiers, grassroots activists in this audience this morning. In fact, Tea Party Patriots Incorporated has graciously stepped up as our national lead sponsor of this year's Western Conservative Summit. And many hours of training in practical skills of grassroots activism delivered by Tea Party Patriots at workshops yesterday, again this afternoon, and again tomorrow afternoon. I think of it just now as Congressman Musgrave has spoken, because when she described that terrific gathering spilling down the lawn out of sight from the state capitol in Austin, which is designed, incidentally, by the very architect that designed our own Colorado state capitol, a lot of us remember the big Tea Party on Tax Day 2010 and that great spring at the Colorado state capitol when the sea of freedom activists stretched almost as far as the eye could see. The biggest crowd I've ever seen at the Colorado state capitol in 40 years of watching Colorado government and politics. Filling that crowd, Tax Day 2010, filling this crowd this morning in Denver and in Scottsdale are people who may be the Marilyn Musgrave of tomorrow. And what do I mean by that? I mean a concerned mom in Fort Morgan, Colorado, active in her church and alarmed at the direction of government-dominated, union-dominated, secular-dominated, left-dominated public education, decided she should run for school board. We remember someone named Michelle Bachmann who keynoted the first summit. She did the same thing. I've got to get involved. I'm running for school board. Next, she's a state representative, is Marilyn Musgrave. Next, she's a state senator, and I had the honor to serve with her, and we sat at adjoining desks in the front row of the Colorado Senate. And we had to remind ourselves not to pass notes and giggle like kids in school sometimes, I must confess to you. Then she's a congresswoman, and now she's a hero of the pro-life movement. Again, Marilyn Musgrave, I wish we had a Ben Hummel portrait for you. He contemplated the task and he put down his pen. We're going to get you a frameable sonogram instead. Thank Marilyn Musgrave one more time. I invite to the platform now our next program. Brad Richardson will do the introduction. He is one of our 1776 scholars at Centennial Institute this summer. He's a guest at CCU. He's a Colorado native, but a guest at CCU attending the eminent Claremont McKenna College in Southern California, where he majors in politics, philosophy, economics, and is a junior. And come on up at the same time so we move quickly. Victor Davis Hanson and his interlocutor, Krista Kafer. Please come on up.
Good morning. We are privileged and honored to have two esteemed scholars, writers, and thinkers with us today, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson and Ms. Krista Kafer. Ms. Kafer, in the tradition of Socrates, will be asking questions of Dr. Hanson on the topic of the moral bankruptcy of liberalism. Dr. Hanson is a raisin grape farmer on a ranch in Selma, California. His family has lived on the same ranch for over 130 years. In his spare time away from the farm, Dr. Hansen is the Martin and Nilly Anderson Senior Fellow in Residence in Classics at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He is also a professor of classics emeritus at California State University, Fresno, the author of nearly 20 books, and a nationally syndicated columnist. Dr. Hansen actually became the focus of much criticism recently in the media for one of his most recent columns. In his column, he argued, now to much controversy, mind you, that different demographics sometimes behave, well, differently, and sometimes disproportionately to the representation in the population. Dr. Hansen drew particular ire from The New Yorker, which critics have cited as confirmation of his hypothesis. Krista Kafer is a proud Colorado native and an education senior fellow at the Independence Institute. She was formerly the senior expert of education policy at the Heritage Foundation and is the author of School Choice 2013, How States Are Providing Greater Opportunity in Education. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Victor Davis Hansen and Krista Kafer.
Now, when I think of the words moral bankruptcy of liberalism, I think of a couple of things. I think of $17 trillion in debt. I think of a government that uses its IRS agents to go after its opponents. And I also think of Carlos Danger, AKA Anthony Weiner. I know, however, that these things are just symptoms of a deeper rot. And one of the advantages of having an eminent historian is that we can look back at some of the things that have actually caused our present dangers. I'm reminded of the quote by Winston Churchill that the longer we look back, the farther we can look ahead. And so I'm excited today to talk to you about the moral bankruptcy of liberalism. I think of Rome, and I know you've spent a lot of time in Rome and studying Rome. You know, they say that Rome was not built in a day. It certainly did not fall in a day. Can we draw some comparisons between the fall of Rome and some of the bankruptcy and degradation here in our country?
Well, obviously we can. I wouldn't be asked that question. It's hard to screw, if I could use the vernacular, it's hard to screw up a system that's viable and logical and works within a generation. But the problems that imploded in the West and Rome in the 5th century AD were known as early as the 1st century AD, and they're unfortunately too familiar to all of us. And that is, the poet Juvenal called them bread and circuses. But what he meant by that was that more and more people became dependent on a redistributive government, and after there were no more provinces to acquire or to find newfound riches, it became a predatory economy, a parasitical economy. So people talked about fairness, not growth in the economy, not creation of new wealth, but static wealth. And my experience as a historian is when you go through history, whether it's 5th century Athens or Imperial Rome, or England Britain after the war, and you hear the elites talk about not being fair, or that, as the president said the other day, the problem is not unemployment, or it's not the deficit or the debt, but it's CEO compensation. That's what he fixated on. It tells you that we're in a mode right now that the pie is static, peasant mentality that's not going to grow, and you have to slice it up in different ways that are more equal. It reminds me, if somebody has a Kia today, it's a much better car than a Mercedes 20 years ago in terms of air conditioning, reliability. It's a beautiful car. But in this way of thinking, it's not fair that somebody doesn't have a Mercedes. If you tell him his Kia or your iPhone is much better than what anybody had 20 years, it doesn't matter. So it's not absolute good or evil or wealth or poverty, but it's relative. And this is really disturbing in history, you see, because people from Plato to Tocqueville warned us that the logical consequences of democracy would be radical equality of result rather than opportunity that would destroy liberty. And our founding fathers thought, wow, how can we be the exception to what Rome and Athens and France? So they came up with all these bizarre things that the left really hated: the electoral college, vetoes, balance of power, even the indirect election of senators in the beginning. And you can see that in most of the thinking today, the therapeutic thinking of liberals. They see liberty and individualism as somehow an impediment to radical egalitarianism. That's where we are, and I think the government's the only mechanism that can ensure that we're all equal on the outside rather than in the beginning.
With these redistributionist policies, I think it's easy to focus on the unfairness of taking from one person and giving to another. But I think there's a sort of a deeper problem that the entitlement mentality, inculcating envy in people, actually sort of is damaging to the soul and damaging to the moral fabric of a country. And I think you alluded to that in saying, you tell people that a Kia is not good enough, they should get a Mercedes. Do you see that at work in this country?
I think that's the driving ideology. If you would, we've become so attuned, so accustomed to it that nobody finds it shocking anymore that the President of the United States doesn't just say spread the wealth, but now we're up to another level. You didn't build that, it's not time to profit, CEOs, corporate jet owners, et cetera, and you collate everything he said, and you get the impression that success, capital, it's not only that it enriches everybody, but that there's something suspect about a person who's well off. How did he do that? It's almost like Balzac said, behind every fortune there's a crime. But the problem with this is, and I think what bothers most of you in this room is not just traditional class envy, but something that's new. It's always been there with the left, but with Obama it really came out, and that is there's going to be a self-appointed elite technocracy. People like Timothy Geithner, Eric Holder, Barack Obama that have been certified by our best schools. And two things we have to remember about this technocracy, sort of like Plato's guardians, but much worse. One is they're not subject to the same ramifications of their own ideology that we are. So they can go to Costa del Sol or Martha's Vineyard, that's okay. And the law is flexible and fluid. That's very dangerous. It's not absolute. The law is a means to a noble end. So if Obama is better than the rest of us and has a better vision, then he really doesn't have to follow the Obamacare mandate. Or he really can go after Boeing. Or he can give amnesty to 1.7 million illegal aliens because his intentions and his goals are supposedly much better than ours. That's very dangerous when you get away from the rule of absolute law.
One of the countries or one of the ancient civilizations that I find most fascinating is the Byzantine Empire. A lot of people maybe don't know, but they actually preserved Western civilization for a good 1,000 years. And if you go and see the walls in modern-day Istanbul, they're like 20 feet thick. So you can't help but wonder, was this country overrun from the outside, or did it crumble from the inside? And as a military historian and a general historian as well, that sort of confluence of threats from outside as well as threats from within, how do you see that at work on our walls of civilization?
Well, every great society has enemies, foreign and domestic, but the question is why at a particular time in their history are those enemies superior to them when they weren't in the past? Why does Rome, when it's only 1/4 of Italy in the Second Punic War, destroy Hannibal, who's an authentic military genius, and yet when it has 70 million people and 1 million square miles, it can't stop a thug like the Visigoths or the Goths? And the answer is there's something changes within. When you go to Byzantium, it's kind of an aberration. How did Western civilization, Christianity survive in that hostile climate in the East for 1,000 years after the fall of the West? So that Black Tuesday is what we say in Greece today of May 29th, 1453. And I think the answer is that what kept Byzantium alive was not their material riches, but people believed in a transcendence. In this case, it was Christianity, the Hellenic language, and Western civilization. They didn't think it was perfect, but they thought it was better than the alternative outside the Byzantine Empire, whether it was the Seljuk Turks, later the Ottomans, the Huns, whoever they were, they thought they were better than the alternative, and they were willing to make enormous sacrifices and articulate that again and again. But when a society gets into a Howard Zinn mode, to quote one historian that's been in the news lately, and doesn't believe that the United States is not just not exceptional, but is no better than the alternative, then history's unforgiving. It kind of comes out of nowhere and says, if you don't believe that you're better than the alternative, nobody else will, and there's no reason for you to continue. And it has to be replenished psychologically. And so all of you in this room, we have a duty, each according to our station. Each day we have to say to ourselves, the United States is better than the alternative, and what in my own way can I do to remind people of that? And I'm not going to be silent about it. And then we have to have an element of the tragic hero within us. You know, we all love the Western Shane or the Magnificent Seven or High Noon, but they all have one theme, don't they? That the tragic hero says, I'm going to do the right thing, but by doing the right thing, people are going to hate me, and they're not going to even want me around when I've done the right thing. And so criticizing what's going on in this country is going to earn you wages that are very unfortunate. But if you don't want to earn them, then we're going to lose the country, it seems to me.
Now, during that great final battle for the heart and soul and the land of the Byzantine Empire, someone left a door open in the inner gate, which I think hastened the end of the battle in favor of the Turks. I get the impression that, in a sense, we are also leaving the door open in this country with our porous borders and the fact that we don't keep track of our visa overstayers. And you've written about this in Mexifornia, A State of Becoming, about sort of leaving the door open to our southern border and how we have millions of people who have not assimilated into our culture, and that in fact has an effect on the fabric of our nation.
We've always had immigration. I'm reading a fascinating book by our prior speaker that's in galley proof that I'm reviewing, Michael Barone. It's an excellent book, and he tries to remind us the Irish, the Jews, Eastern Europeans, and there's much truth to that. But I think in the book he's worried, and perhaps all of us are worried, that for immigration to work in the United States, it traditionally has had to be legal. And we traditionally had to have a melting pot, and we traditionally had to believe in the powers of assimilation, integration, and intermarriage. And we've never had a proximate country with such a long 1,700-mile border, which is the sole source. There's a lot of reasons that can explain why Mexico, after 1970, started to export its people, but it wouldn't have mattered. It was in here, as you say, the door was open. Any issue that unites the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal and the Voice of Aztlan is a very strange issue. But they have one thing in common. It's not left or right, as you see with the Gang of Eight, Democratic or Republican, but it's elite versus the mass. The average people of all persuasions are skeptical, because if they're a worker, I talked to a Hispanic worker and he says, why does my leadership want this amnesty when for the first time in my life, I'm making $11 an hour? I don't want my wages undercut by people from Mexico. It's been terrible for American workers. It's the Democratic and La Raza elite want a unassimilated constituency that's replenished every year by 300,000 or 400,000 that ensures that demographics change and that they can be spokesmen for group grievances rather than individuals. People's character, their race will never be incidental to their character. It'll always be essential if you keep bringing people in that can't achieve parity in one or two generations. Employers, as I said, want cheap labor, access to it. And then they dress it all up with this utopian caring, when in fact it's one of the most amoral, uncaring phenomenon in the world. It's bad for American poor. It destroys the concept of the rule of law. If all of you have to file a tax return on a particular date, is that a negotiable phenomenon? Can you say, I sort of kind of would like to pay it, but I really don't want to, as if an immigration law or an IRS law is something up for discussion? Who is to say, when you start destroying the law or the sanctity of the law, that you can pick and choose which other laws people have to follow? And we've seen that already with the erosion of federal immigration law. So I'm worried about it, and I'm confident that if we would shut the border and we would deport the people who have committed crimes, who have just arrived in expectation of amnesty, and who are on public assistance, there would be still a majority that we could work with. We could give them green cards and have a path to amnesty. But when I look at this Gang of Eight bill, that's not what it's about. It's about a DREAM Act, but there's no UNDREAM Act with it. We're talking about giving people amnesty, but not one senator has the integrity to get up and said, I will give amnesty or a path of citizenship to person A, but person B is not going to get it, and this is why, and they're not going to get it first before I give it to A, because that's politically incorrect.
So, picking what laws we choose to enforce is really an assault on the concept of rule of law. And we talked a little bit backstage about some of the things that this administration has done in just ignoring the law, like, oh, the law says this, well, we're not really going to do that. And I'm thinking No Child Left Behind, I'm thinking immigration law, I'm thinking Obamacare. I mean, it's a relief in some ways that part of it's, going to be on hold for a year, but there's also, it speaks to the rule of law that if you're executing the laws, you can't just say, hey, I don't feel like doing this.
Yeah, I think that's why the founding fathers who were well versed.
Victor, excuse me, before you take that rule of law question, can we get the texting slide? We're going to do the texting for some questions a little differently here.
Okay.
You're going to be able to see them go on the screen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, if it was just up, forgive me, but there it is again. And text your questions with that code number. For both Arizona and Colorado, we're on an equal footing. And we'll go to your questions in a few minutes, but this is a great one from Krista Kafer about rule of law. Excuse me, Victor.
Oh, go ahead and answer my question. I'll take the speaker's prerogative. We'll go first.
Okay. Well, I think when we look around, the law has become fluid, and this is exactly what the founders were worried about, because they looked at Athens versus Rome. Rome was a constitutional republic. Athens was ruled what 51% of the people thought on any given day, and right after the founders expressed these worries, we had the French Revolution and this idea of fraternity and egalitarianism enforced by what 51% of the people want. That's not constitutional or consensual government. And so what do we look at with this president? If Boeing wants to put a plant in South Carolina, the National Labor Relations Board can try to shut it down. They can shut down a small guitar company. Don't enforce the individual mandate. Give 1.7 million people amnesty right before the election. So the idea again is that the law is not an abstract or a final or a legislative product, but it's predicated critical legal theory on what 51% are perceived to want and purposes of social justice. So if Eric Holder thinks that the Black Panthers may or may not have disrupted a polling booth, it won't matter because their aims are egalitarianism and fairness, and they have a history of oppression, he thinks, therefore the law is secondary. And that's what, same thing with the Trayvon Martin case. A judge, I know I'll be in a little bit of controversy here, but the proverbial culpable white male was not involved in that case. There was somebody of mixed Latino heritage in an altercation with an African American adjudicated by an all-female jury overseen by a female judge, and yet the politicalization turned that into a sort of racial issue when it was not. And the idea of a president commenting as that trial was going, it hadn't even been adjudicated, and after it was being adjudicated and it was subject to a civil rights investigation, then to comment again about the appearance. I think all of you would be shocked if Bill Clinton had said right in the middle of the OJ trial, wow, Nicole Simpson looks like the second daughter I never had. That would be horrible to say that, because it would influence the jury. And so we're seeing things in the law that we haven't seen.
Yeah, it seems to me that the difference between a country based on rule of law and one that sort of does whatever it feels like is the difference between, I don't know, us and a southern neighbor, Cuba, perhaps other countries where despotism rules the day. We have a very interesting question from Patrick McKinney from Albuquerque. He says that in 300 years from now, how will historians summarize what happened to the United States in 2013? Can you look back in order to look forward and answer that question?
Well, for this occasion, I'm not going to be empirical, but I'm going to be hopeful. And I'm going to suggest that people are going to look back and say, this was the perfect storm of the left. They got everything they wanted. They had a House and a Democratic Senate from 2006. They got the first African-American post-racial transcendental candidate that pushed every liberal button. Very popular, very eloquent speaker, very skilled in teleprompted rhetoric. So, and they came in after a terrible meltdown, the 2008 meltdown in September, which destroyed the 3-point lead of McCain and Palin. They came in an unpopular war. Everything lined up. There was no incumbent from the first time since 1952. It was an orphaned election. No incumbent, by that I mean vice president or president. Everything was on the left. And here we are, fast forward 5 years later, with sinking polls and a nation that's in turmoil. And I think that suggests that America is exceptional, and that people of all different classes and all different races do not believe in the same principles that are operative in Europe, South America, Asia, Africa. And this is a different place. People come here because it's a different place, and they're not willing in the third century of their existence to give it up. And if we can withstand this dark period in our country, I think that we'll be stronger for it. It'll be a cathartic experience.
Now, one of my favorite quotes from Virgil's Aeneid is, "Fortune favors the brave." And I think it is a time to be brave. I'm curious, though, is there a critical flaw in liberalism that we can exploit, that we can be brave and be triumphant?
Well, there's so many that we'd be here all day, but the first is that liberalism doesn't reflect human nature and human acquisitiveness and self-interest. So if you take a liberal position, if I work in Palo Alto and I hear everybody saying that they do not want school choice and they're for open borders, the Silicon Valley elite then do not want to put their kids in the public schools that used to be very good. Though they're swarming to what I would call southern private academies that are sprouting up around the Stanford campus. In other words, there's a contradiction that Obama says that we have to watch out for CEOs, but he doesn't think that applies to him. Or John Edwards or Al Gore, all of these people, and look at Al Gore, the avatar of global warming and climate change, and yet he sells a failed cable news station to an anti-Semitic Mideastern authoritarian government who enriches him by the profits from fossil fuels, and he does so in haste to beat capital gains tax increases. And so the flaw of liberalism that we have to point out is that they don't even believe the ramifications of their own ideology because it's contrary to self-interest and human nature. It's hypocritical, in other words.
It definitely is hypocritical, and I've never seen the facts get in the way of liberals' ability to believe their own silliness. In grad school, I often mention to my professors that, Marxism led to the death of 100 million people, and they just don't seem to blink an eye over that. They seem to be under the spell of their own lies. We've got to wrap it up here, but I just want to give the audience a sense of hope, a sense of what it's like to be brave and what we can do to get out there and do the kind of mending that needs to be done to the social fabric.
I think I'll end with the same advice. If I was going to be a little bit more specific, the Republican Party is not the blue blood Eastern aristocrats anymore. That's the Democratic Party. This party is populist. When we talk about gas prices, they've gone up an aggregate of $1 trillion in the last 5 years. We should be saying that hurts us, the average commuter. When we look at illegal immigration, we say this is a Wall Street Journal and La Raza and Democratic elite issue, but it's not for American workers. When we look at the Farm Bill, we should say, yes, we want to curb food stamps, but we don't need corporate agribusiness to get more subsidies. So there are issues that unite the people across the political spectrum, and we need to be populist rather than elitist as our opponents have become.
Thank you so much, Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you.
Krista Kafer, thank you so much. Skillfully conducted interview. And Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so very, very much. Our fourth summit, and we've been looking forward since the very first one to have you here. And if you're willing, we're surely going to want to have you back. I mentioned earlier what an achievement of eminence it is in American politics and political thought if you're just known by some initials. And I must say that while VDH is not a household acronym to some of us, it is synonymous with thoughtful, authoritative, and as he just concluded, ultimately hopeful, encouraging analysis of thousands of years, truly, of Western civilization, this great tradition of which you and I are the trustees. I'd borrow from another three-letter acronym, JFK, and I would say that when we have luncheon today, be it in Denver or Scottsdale, with Ted Cruz and Jenny Beth Martin and 3 candidates for governor of Colorado and eminent Arizona state and national political figures. Total of us lunching today, something north of 1,600 people in 2 cities. It will be the greatest intellectual gathering on the right since Victor Davis Hanson lunched alone. We're going to break now, but we need to talk for a moment, voice to voice, with Arizona Western Conservative Summit host Tom Brown of 960 The Patriot and their sister Christian Talk station there in Phoenix. Tom, we've sent Guy Benson winging on his way to you. This morning, you and your colleagues have heard from KT McFarland, Micah Barone. We got some feedback. And I'll just stop with that. Tom Brown, what's the mood in Scottsdale this morning? Are we hopeful that America's best days are ahead? You and your colleagues have heard from KT McFarland, Micah Barone. We got some feedback. And I'll just stop with that. Tom Brown, what's the mood in Scottsdale this morning? Are we hopeful that America's best days are ahead? We should get that video feed coming in from Arizona, unless David Axelrod's technology thugs have again undone me. Well, for the first time in the history of Tom Brown, apparently he's left speechless. Arizona friends, just know that we wish you well as we go on break from simulcast right now, and here in the hall, we'll be breaking as well. A few notes as we take about 1 hour to let the room be reset for you to do your networking, to cruise the exhibit area. There are book signings that will be going on. They're listed on page 5 of your program. If you have a badge of aqua color or with a host ribbon, your gathering upstairs starts right now. The doors will reopen at, let's say, 12 o'clock high for lunch. And please be ready to come on in because we need to get back on schedule on a crowded, busy day. And finally, there's a book on your table called Alone Yet Not Alone. It's this book, Alone Yet Not Alone. It's a true story, and it's been made into a terrific new feature film, which is released in September, but you can sneak preview that movie tonight in this room after dinner. Raise your hand if you went to Alone Yet Not Alone Yet last night. The hands that you see can testify to you how well you will invest your time after dinner this evening by seeing this exciting new true story of Christian heroism on the American frontier before the Revolutionary War. And if you would like to meet Kelly Grayson, the star of the film, or Jim Leininger, the producer of the film, or Barbara Divasek, the director of the film, just text 210-246-3610. Summit is adjourned for lunch break.